Picture this: Diesel, my massive buffalo, was lazily chewing cud by the fence when a yellow safari bus roared onto my Texas ranch like we were deep in the Serengeti. Not my private slice of peace. I'm standing there, bathrobe flapping, coffee sloshing, staring at a shuttle stuffed with tourists wielding iPads, cameras, and binoculars, ogling my land like it's a National Geographic special. And who's at my gate, sporting a ridiculous safari hat and clutching a clipboard, ushering them in like she's running a theme park? Karen, the HOA president. She spins to the crowd, proclaiming, "Behold the majestic American bison in his natural habitat." Diesel, that majestic beast, was seconds from turning her bus into scrap metal when she yeppin' latched the gate. Her manicured nails flicked it open like she was unwrapping a designer purse. Deaf to my frantic yells across the pasture, Diesel's ears twitched, his hulking frame tensing like a coiled spring. The tourists squealed, thinking it was all part of the show. One woman even shouted, "Does he do tricks?" as Diesel pawed the dirt tricks. If she meant charging through a crowd of clueless retirees and flipping a minibus like a pancake, then sure, he's got tricks. My mug hit the ground, and I bolted, hollering for Bella to sound the siren as the herd behind Diesel lined up like shoppers on Black Friday. I jumped on the ATV, tearing across the yard as the first rumblings of a stampede began. Diesel leading the charge like a furry freight train. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Freight train. The gate swung wide and the herd poured out. One of the tourists dropped a protein bar and a young calf made the hard turn, barreling straight toward it like it was a holy offering. I swerved to cut her off, but by then it was too late. 3 Buffalo had already surrounded the first bus, sniffing tires and tapping their horns against the windows like confused toddlers with way too much power. Karen screamed and waved her clipboard in circles, like a traffic cop in panic mode, shouting orders. Orders, stay calm, this is normal. It was anything but. To make things worse, HOA Vice President Doug was standing just down the road, filming the entire mess with his phone. He looked half amused, half horrified, and all opportunist he clearly saw. Karen opened that gate, but I knew how this neighborhood worked. The narrative would twist faster than a tumbleweed in a twister by sunset. I'd be the reckless cowboy letting wild animals terrorize the good residents of the newly built Whispering Cedars community. Never mind that my family's ranch had stood here for 3 generations before a single HOA sign ever got posted. Never mind that every one of those buffalo were tagged, monitored, and fenced with more care than a Fort Knox shipment. Karen had trespassed, but she had also brought an audience, and I had a feeling she wasn't done by the time Bella joined me by the fence. The herd had dispersed down the side road and onto the gravel trails behind the development Diesel had taken a particular interest in one unlucky bus that had stalled its wheels, spinning in a shallow ditch. He stood in front of it, blocking its exit. Like a bouncer at a biker bar, a woman inside the bus waved a brochure that had clearly been printed for this safari nonsense. On the back was our ranch's outline stolen from county property records with a new name slapped on it. Prairie Majesty Experience. Karen had literally created an illegal tour company around our animals and thought nobody would notice. Bella's face went from confused to furious in 2 seconds flat. She asked if I'd seen the flyer. and I said no, but I was looking right at the result. Half the herd was now wandering near the HOA walking trail. Diesel, our most stubborn and most majestic buffalo, snorted dust into the air and began slowly nudging the side of the bus. A panel dented inward with a metal pop that made every tourist inside jump. One man dropped his phone, and the screen cracked on impact. Karen finally realized things were unraveling. She tried waving the tourists back inside, but they were too busy taking selfies. One woman even climbed onto the edge of the fence to get a panoramic shot. The second her flash went off, Diesel charged forward, not into the bus but past it, heading toward the open playground nearby. That was my breaking point. I jumped back onto the ATV and sped after him. Diesel had no interest in kids. He was heading for the hay bales we'd stacked near the community garden, but it looked bad. I managed to steer him away with a toss of feed and a loud whistle, but not before Karen screamed, "He's going for the children," even though no kids were anywhere nearby. As I redirected Diesel and pushed him back toward the north field, I realized I was fighting a public relations war just as much as a livestock crisis. When we finally got the herd back into the outer pasture and secured the gate, this time triple locked, I looked at Bella, who had her phone out and was already scrolling through the HOA community group. The posts were exploding: pictures, videos, Karen's own live stream now riddled with comments like "What is this chaos?" and "Refund now." One person even posted a slow-motion clip of Diesel's snort with the caption, "Karen's new haired dryer." Later that night, as the sun dropped behind the hills and peace returned to the ranch, we sat on the porch with our boots kicked up and our dog curled between us. I asked Bella how long she thought it would take before the eight tried to spin this in their favor. She answered, without looking up, "They already are. Doug just posted a message saying, 'We failed to secure wildlife containment during neighborhood festivities.'" I laughed, but it wasn't funny. That was the game. They invade, they spin it, and they make us the villain. But this time, they'd crossed the line. Karen had opened that gate. She'd turned our land into a circus, and she thought she could get away with it. I stood up and looked back toward the field where Diesel was now lying in the moonlight, calm and powerful. We weren't going to let this slide. Karen wanted a safari, then we'd give her a show one. She wouldn't forget, and the next time she opened that gate, it wouldn't be buffalo she'd have to run from. It would be consequences. We were going to outplan her, outcourt her, and outsmart her. This time the stampede was coming for her reputation. By sunrise the next day, the HOA was in full lockdown. Yellow caution tape crisscrossed the neighborhood's front entry like a crime scene, and security guards, hired from some discount temp agency, stood near the clubhouse, looking confused and overwhelmed. A few looked like they hadn't even been briefed on what was going on, asking residents if they'd seen any loose cattle. It was laughable. Buffalo weren't cattle, and they certainly weren't loose anymore. Diesel and the herd were safe and secure back on our land, but the damage had already been done, at least to Karen's little fantasy of HOA dominance. What she'd started as a vanity safari tour had now turned into a community scandal, and the neighborhood group chat was lit up like a Christmas tree. Screenshots of Karen's live stream and flyers were circulating like wildfire, each one painting a clearer picture that she had orchestrated the whole thing without permission, safety planning, or common sense. I was halfway through feeding the ostriches when Bella came out with her laptop and a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything at first. just raised an eyebrow and rotated the screen so I could see it. It was an email from the HOA board, marked urgent. The subject line read, "Come community incident request for immediate meeting with wildlife owner." I set the feed bucket down and leaned in. The message wasn't even apologetic. It was full of legalized, to imply that I had been partially responsible for the uncontained animal disruption caused by miscommunication and unclear boundary markings. In other words, they wanted to talk before someone got sued. I told Bella I wasn't meeting them on their turf. If they wanted to talk, they could come to the ranch, sign a visitor waiver, and bring coffee that wasn't brewed from the HOA clubhouse's moldy Keurig. 3 hours later, 3 members of the HOA showed up, none of them being Karen Doug, who I now considered the most spineless man in the region, stepped forward with that fake little HOA smile that always looked like it was painted on with chalk. Alongside him was Cheryl, the treasurer, and a guy named Barry, who I'd never seen before, but who carried a clipboard and looked like a nervous insurance adjuster. They didn't want to step past the gate until I assured them the buffalo weren't nearby. Diesel, in reality, was 10 feet away, behind a brush line, watching them with the calm indifference of a creature that knew exactly how powerful he was. They didn't see him, but I did, and I grinned. Doug cleared his throat and began reading from a printout. It was a carefully worded document stating they were deeply concerned about the events of the previous day and were hoping to collaborate on a resolution that would restore confidence in the HOA's leadership and prevent further incidents. I interrupted him halfway through and asked if he was here to admit Karen opened my gate without authorization. He stammered something about pending internal investigations and ongoing dialogue. I told him dialogue required honesty, and so far, all I'd seen from the HOA was spin. Cheryl tried a different tactic. She offered to host a joint community event, a sort of rebranding effort, where I could showcase my wildlife center in a positive and safe manner to help ease neighborhood tensions. In return, the HOA would formally acknowledge the value of my conservation work. She even smiled like she thought that was generous. I laughed outright. Bella, standing behind me, nearly choked on her water. I asked them how many buffalo attacks had occurred. 0 injuries, none property damage, minimal, some flattened rose bushes, and 1 dented van bumper that Karen had parked too close to the trail anyway. Meanwhile, Karen had illegally entered private property, opened a locked gate, forged a fake tour company, and lied to guests and residents alike. Yet here they were offering a potluck in exchange for my silence. Barry, the clipboard guy, finally spoke. He said that if I refused to participate in constructive reconciliation, the HOA would be forced to pursue a formal complaint with the county zoning office about the presence of aggressive livestock. I leaned in, smiled, and asked him if he'd like to watch a video. I walked them over to the solar-charged field camera console and loaded the footage from the day before. There was Karen in full safari getup, snipping the lock with bolt cutters and waving the guests inside. She even said, "Welcome to the Prairie Majesty experience," a phrase that now felt like the most expensive mistake of her life. Doug looked like he'd swallowed a live scorpion. Cheryl just blinked and muttered, "Oh my God." Barry turned pale. I told them I had already sent this video to the county, the sheriff, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I also casually mentioned that I'd received 2 emails from national news outlets asking for an interview. One of them had already contacted Karen for comment, and according to my sources, she claimed the animals escaped due to a breach in fencing. I asked Doug if he'd like to explain how the breach occurred after she cut the lock herself. He didn't answer. I ended the meeting there, told them to get off my land, and warned that the next person who opened my gate without permission would be filmed, fined, and possibly sued as they left. Diesel finally stood up from the brush and walked forward. Cheryl screamed and jumped behind Barry, who tripped over his clipboard. Diesel didn't even care. He walked past them and plopped himself in a shady patch like a retired heavyweight champion. Doug muttered something about needing to review the footage with legal, and they all hurried off. I walked back to the house, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt since I first bought this land. The buffalo were just being buffalo. It was the humans who needed cages. By nightfall, the narrative was shifting. Social media wasn't buying the hose. Spin a video compilation of Karen's fake safari went viral, complete with background music, meme captions, and even a mock documentary narrator voiceover. Someone edited her safari hat into a crown and dubbed her Queen of Chaos. Local news ran the story, and suddenly I was getting calls from ranchers, rescue centers, and even the mayor's office who wanted to visit the ranch, not for a safari, but to support conservation efforts. Karen, meanwhile, had gone completely silent, but Bella wasn't convinced it was over. She suspected Karen was planning something bigger, something to shift the blame back onto us. We installed more cameras, reinforced the gates, and even began drafting a legal complaint against the HOA itself. Not just Karen, the county investigator had already requested statements and scheduled interviews. We were playing defense now. But soon it would be time to go on offense. That night, as Diesel let out a low huff beside the porch and the stars came out in the wide Texas sky, I thought about all the ways this could end. Karen wasn't just reckless, she was entitled, manipulative, and dangerous in that suburban, petty dictator kind of way. She had power because people were scared to confront her. But I wasn't. This wasn't just about buffalo anymore. This was about land, truth, and the kind of wild that belongs in nature, not in an HOA meeting room. And soon the whole community would see exactly who Karen really was. Because the next chapter wasn't going to be quiet, it was going to roar. By the following morning, the HOA board had descended. In 2 open Civil War emails between members leaked into the resident group chats, and not by accident. Someone inside the board had clearly had enough of Karen's antic. One message from Cheryl read, "Karen is a liability. I will not sign off on another dime being spent to clean up her mess." Another message showed Doug trying to set up a private call with Karen to discuss narrative realignment, which was just a pathetic way of saying, how do we make this disaster look like Liam's fault instead of ours? I didn't even have to do anything at that point. The HOA was eating itself alive, and the community had turned into a spectator arena, watching the collapse unfold like it was a Netflix drama. All I had to do was keep the popcorn coming and let Karen keep swinging the shovel she was using to dig her own grave. Meanwhile, our ranch had never been more peaceful. Diesel and the herd were grazing calmly. The ostriches kept to themselves, and even the tortoises seemed to sense that the storm outside our fence wasn't worth rushing toward. We had increased camera coverage, replaced the damaged lock with a commercial-grade smart pad, and added a backup chain, just in case. Bella also printed signs with laminated private wildlife preserve, entry by permit only, violators will be prosecuted notices, and placed them in 3 languages on the outer gate. And still somehow I felt Karen wasn't done. The woman was like a wasp. You might not see her for a moment, but you knew she was circling, waiting for a second chance. To sting, that chance came at the most unexpected time late that afternoon. Bella walked into the barn, carrying her tablet with a look of disgust on her face. Without saying anything, she pressed play on a new HOA social media post. It was Karen now, miraculously recovered from her rosebush fainting spell, sitting at a patio table with a smug look and a mug that said "Community First." She was live streaming, calmly announcing that the HOA had just passed an emergency resolution. In it, they declared, all animal-related businesses operating within 1 mile of HOA property to be reviewed under community safety bylaws. I blinked at the screen, not sure if I was hearing it right. Karen had decided that because our ranch shared a border with their housing development, even though the legal boundary predated the HOA by decades, they now had safety jurisdiction over my property's use. In the video, she stated they were forming a review committee to assess potential risks posed by livestock, which apparently included my rescue animals. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. She smirked and said, no one should have to live in fear of sudden wildlife incidents. It's time we put the neighborhood first. Bella paused the video, looked at me, and said, she's building a trap. She wants you to challenge her publicly so she can claim you're the hostile one. I wasn't going to bite, not yet. Instead, we did something Karen never expected. We documented everything. Every time a neighbor came by to say they supported us, we logged it. Every instance of online misinformation was captured and time-stamped. Then we sent it all to our lawyer, who added it to the growing file of evidence that Karen was abusing her HOA authority. The best part, Bella had recorded a screen capture of Karen's original Safari stream, and it included a full 23 seconds of her saying, don't worry, I cut the lock myself, he'll never notice, while laughing in front of the gate. It was gold, but Karen wasn't done trying to rewrite history that evening. As the sun dipped behind the hills, we saw her marching up the gravel path with 2 people in towberry, the clipboard guy and a tall man in slacks carrying a briefcase. I met them at the fence before they could get close to the animals. Karen gave me a sickly sweet smile and said they were here for a routine safety audit, as authorized by the HOA's new resolution. I told her she could turn around unless she had a county permit and a sheriff's escort. She said she didn't need one. I pointed to the fence sign and said, then your little audit just turned into trespassing. Barry was visibly sweating, clearly regretting everything about being there. The man with the briefcase spoke up and introduced himself as Richard Clark, a community compliance consultant hired by the HOA. Asked if he had any legal authority. He said, not technically, but they were hoping to conduct a non-binding safety evaluation. I laughed and said, is that like a pretend court date where I bring real buffalo? Karen didn't find it funny, but I didn't care. I told them to leave immediately and added that any attempt to cross the gate again without county authorization would result in a police report. Karen looked rattled, but she wasn't ready to admit defeat. She turned on her phone's camera and began narrating, as you can see, we are being denied access to investigate dangerous conditions threatening the community. I cut her off by triggering the loudspeaker connected to the upper barn, where Bella's voice calmly played. A pre-recorded message. Trespassers will be prosecuted. All activity is being recorded. Karen's expression turned to stone, but the briefcase man nodded and started backing away. Barry tripped on a rock, trying to follow. I didn't even bother hiding. My grin, Bella and I watched them retreat down the road, Karen still muttering to her phone, probably live-streaming her humiliation. Diesel once again wandered up behind me and let out a long breath, his nostrils flaring. It felt like even he understood the absurdity of it all, but that wasn't the end. 2 hours later, I got a call from a contact at the county clerk's office. She quietly informed me that someone, presumably Karen, had submitted a request to investigate a public nuisance involving my land. The request was denied immediately for being outside HOA jurisdiction, but she thought I should know that someone was clearly trying to weaponize the bureaucracy against me. I thanked her and hung up, a storm beginning to brew in my chest. It was time to go on the offensive that night. We finalized a formal complaint and submitted it to the county legal office. In it, we outlined Karen's trespassing, unauthorized commercial activity gate, tampering property, misrepresentation, and harassment via misuse of HOA authority. Bella also drafted a request for a temporary restraining order, preventing Karen or any HOA member from entering within 20 feet of our property line. We attached video-proof screenshots of the safari flyers and the live streams. Our lawyer said it was one of the most airtight harassment cases he'd seen. We also notified the local news station that we were willing to speak on the record about how HOA power had gone too far. Within minutes of the story airing, our inbox lit up with messages of support. One neighbor offered to create a petition. Another offered to testify. People who had previously kept their heads down were now rising up. Karen hadn't just poked the bear, she'd kicked the entire den. As the stars lit up the Texas night, Diesel stood beside the gate like a silent guardian. I sat on the porch and watched the dark sky stretch out into forever, knowing tomorrow would bring another round. But this time we weren't just reacting, we were taking back the narrative. Karen might have started this with a gate and a dream of safari stardom, but I was going to end it with truth, with community, and with every ounce of the wild she underestimated. By the time the weekend rolled in the air around the HOA felt heavier, like the whole community was holding its breath, waiting for the next explosion. The story had grown legs far beyond our county. A regional news affiliate picked it up, spinning the tale of the HOA safari gone wild into a two-segment complete with dramatic music and slow-motion buffalo shots from Karen's original stream. Karen had wanted attention, and she got it, just not the kind she could control. At first, she tried leaning into the chaos, portraying herself as a bold visionary who was simply trying to bring natural education to the suburban landscape. But no one was buying it anymore, especially not after the full footage went viral, including the part where she clearly said, "I cut the lock, he won't care." With that line alone, she turned herself from misguided to malicious in the eyes of the public, and the public was watching closely now. At the ranch, things had never been more tense or more united. Neighbors, who had never so much as waved before, were suddenly dropping by with pies, casseroles, and supportive messages scribbled on cardstock. One elderly couple brought a tray of cookies and said, "This neighborhood needs more buffalo and fewer buffoons." Even local farmers started calling, some offering solidarity, others sharing similar HOA horror stories. It turned out Karen had become the face of overreach, a walking cautionary tale about what happens when entitlement meets poor judgment was strange to become the center of a small cultural flashpoint. But we welcomed the support, we needed it, because Karen still wasn't backing down. Despite everything, she had managed to cling to her title as HOA president. Apparently, the bylaws made it nearly impossible to remove her without a supermajority vote at a formal meeting, which she kept delaying with excuses about safety protocols and administrative backlogs. The more she stalled, the angrier the residents grew. Rumors swirled that she was shredding old budget documents and trying to move HOA funds into obscure side project. Bella found proof that she'd attempted to file for a non-profit registration for Karen's Nature Conservancy, using HOA funds to cover the application fee. It was so ridiculous, it would have been funny if it weren't so calculated. In response, we ramped up our own efforts. We filed a second legal complaint, this time for financial misconduct, and shared the paper trail with both the county oversight committee and the local press. Our lawyer assured us that things were escalating in the right direction. Still, I could feel the pressure tightening like a noose. We were at a turning point. Either Karen would fold, or she'd try something reckless. To flip the narrative, the next blow came on Monday afternoon. I was out in the north pasture repairing a section of fence when Bella came running up, phone in hand, her face pale. She didn't even speak. She just handed me the phone and pointed to the screen. It was a live HOA broadcast, filmed from the community center. Karen stood in front of a newly installed banner that read, HOA Wildlife Regulation Reform Act, vote today. She was proposing a community-wide resolution to ban dangerous wildlife within 1 mile of the HOA boundaries. It was a direct shot at our ranch, wrapped in concerned trolling language about child safety and noise pollution. Her voice echoed through the feed as she called it a necessary step toward peaceful cohabitation between man and nature. My name wasn't said aloud, but my land was highlighted on the map behind her, circled in red. This wasn't just a PR stunt. This was a targeted move designed to manipulate the frightened and uninformed. She even brought a wildlife expert to speak, a man who claimed buffalo could smell fear and attack unprovoked, which was not only laughably false, but biologically idiotic. Still, a few HOA members in the crowd nodded along. It didn't matter whether it was true. What mattered was whether it was persuasive enough to swing the vote. The emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. Karen was counting on short notice to keep opposition minimal, but she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated how fed up everyone else was. Within an hour, residents began showing up at our ranch, asking if the rumors were true. Bella and I stood on the front porch, speaking to each person who came. We explained the truth, that the animals were federally registered, fully contained, and had never posed any real threat to the community. We showed footage of the rescue operations we conducted, including Diesel being removed from an illegal breeder. We played clips from Karen's original stream, letting her own words speak louder than ours. By sundown, something incredible happened. Instead of Karen's rushed vote being a quiet ambush, it turned into a full-blown town hall. Over 100 people showed up, many dragging lawn chairs and folding stools. Karen tried to take the podium early, claiming the HOA had limited time, but the crowd pushed back. A retired Marine named Frank stood and loudly demanded a resident comment period. When Karen refused, people started chanting, "Let us speak, let us speak." She had no choice but to step down. What followed was a flood of raw, unfiltered voices. Parents spoke of how their children loved seeing the buffalo through the fence. An art teacher said her students had painted portraits of the animals. One woman shared how visiting the ranch had helped her autistic son learn to connect with nature. The testimonials were emotionally powerful and real. Then came the final mic drop moment. Bella stepped up, laptop in hand, and projected a side-by-side comparison. On the wall, one side showed Karen's flyer for the Prairie Majesty experience with her name in fine print at the bottom as coordinator. The other side showed the property violation report filed against our ranch that very morning, stamped, submitted by HOA president. The hypocrisy was undeniable. You could feel the room shift. Murmurs turned into headshakes. Eyes turned to Karen, who suddenly looked very small behind the podium. When the vote was finally called, the result wasn't even close. 74% voted against Karen's resolution, 20% abstained, the rest, only 6%, voted in favor, and most of them left before the final tally was read. It was a total collapse. Karen stood frozen, the microphone still in her hand, as the crowd began to stand and leave. No applause, no fanfare, just quiet rejection. For the first time, her control had slipped beyond her grip. But the biggest surprise came not from the vote, but from what happened afterward. Doug, the same HOA vice president who had filmed the Buffalo chaos days earlier, approached me in the parking lot. He extended a folder and said, "You didn't get this from me." Inside were internal HOA emails, dozens of them, many from Karen. One detailed her plans to launch a paid neighborhood adventure tour series with outside investors. Another showed an attempt to secure personal liability waivers in case of minor Buffalo-related injuries. It was enough to prove fraud intent and full knowledge of her actions. I asked Doug why he gave it to me. He said, "Because I'm tired of being scared of her too." That night, as Bella and I sat under the stars, with Diesel lying nearby like a mountain of calm strength, we felt something new settle over the land. It wasn't just relief, it was momentum. We weren't just defending our space anymore, we were dismantling the walls that gave people like Karen power. And though we knew there would still be a final battle ahead, one last play from a desperate woman grasping at her crumbling throne, we also knew one thing with certainty. She started this fight with a pair of bolt cutters and a borrowed ego, but we were going to finish it with truth, community, and the quiet thunder of a buffalo herd that would not be contained again. The storm didn't come with thunder, it came with a certified envelope. Early Tuesday morning, just as the sun crept over the barn and Diesel let out his usual grunt of greeting, a crier in a spotless uniform walked up the drive holding a stiff yellow envelope like it contained a crown jewel. Bella signed for it while I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened it. By the fence inside was a formal summons. Karen, still clinging to whatever delusions of authority she had left, was filing a civil suit against us for emotional distress, property disruption, and community endangerment. She accused us of willfully unleashing wild animals into the neighborhood, manipulating public opinion against her, and creating a hostile environment for her legitimate governance. The sheer gall of it hit me like a slap to the face. This woman had trespassed, broken our locks, started an illegal business on our land, and now she wanted to sue us for reacting to it. I showed the paper to Diesel, who blinked slowly, then snorted like he too couldn't believe the nerve. But it wasn't just a stunt. The lawsuit was real, and though flimsy, it was enough to require a response. Our lawyer wasn't surprised. In fact, he predicted it. When someone like Karen gets cornered, they don't apologize, they escalate. And that's exactly what this was. Her last play, a desperate attempt to regain some kind of narrative control before the full weight of her actions came crashing down. The trouble was even frivolous lawsuits take time, energy, and money to dismantle. She knew that she was trying to wear us down. What she didn't know was that by the time she'd filed the complaint, we were already several steps ahead. Later that day, the county's oversight committee released an official investigation report. It landed like a hammer. Not only did it validate every one of our claims: trespassing, unauthorized events, gate tampering, and misuse of HOA funds, but it also included new charges. Karen had attempted to backdate budget approvals for the tour materials and had directed HOA funds to a personal account listed under Community Enrichment Events LLC, which, as the paper trail showed, was registered to her nephew in Nevada. It was no longer just a matter of HOA overreach. It was fraud. The community's reaction was immediate. Residents who had once whispered their frustrations now shouted them. Signs appeared in front yards reading "Not in our name" and "Disband HOA." Now a group of retired veterans organized a petition to remove Karen from her position. Through a special emergency vote, it passed in less than 48 hours, with a landslide, at a hastily organized HOA meeting with more than 200 residents in attendance. Karen was officially removed as president. When the final count was read aloud, she didn't even look up. She simply stood, gathered her papers, and walked out without a word. It was the quietest exit she'd ever made. Nobody followed her, but the damage she'd caused still needed cleanup. Our legal team filed a countersuit for harassment, property damage, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We included not just the original footage, but also audio recordings, leaked emails, and a growing list of witness testimonies from residents and even former board members. The local news station covered it all. One anchor dryly remarked, "From HOA president to civil defendant, Karen's wildlife adventure ends not with a roar, but with a judge's gavel." It was poetic. Even then, we weren't interested in dragging this through the mud. What we wanted was accountability, and we were finally getting it. The court ruled that Karen's case had no merit and dismissed it with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile. She was ordered to pay our legal fees, which came to over $38,000. She didn't show up to that hearing. Instead, her lawyer quietly withdrew from the case a week prior, citing irreconcilable client behavior. After the ruling, things began to shift. The new HOA leadership, stripped of Karen's influence, voted to formally recognize our property as a protected wildlife sanctuary. They issued a community-wide apology and even offered to cover the cost of the fence lock that Karen had cut. I declined the money, but accepted the apology. What mattered was that the lies had been laid bare, and the truth stood firm. That weekend, Bella and I hosted an open ranch day. Not a safari, not a tour, just an open gate for those who wanted to learn. We worked with the local animal shelter and a school science program to organize educational booths, wildlife art exhibits, and even a naming ceremony for a new baby bison born just days earlier. The community showed up in full force. Kids ran barefoot across the grass. Families took pictures beside Diesel and the herd from behind the safety line, and someone even brought a Karen piñata that everyone took turns whacking with foam bath. Diesel didn't participate, but I'm pretty sure He approved, and then came the part I'll never forget. Near the end of the event, a small group of residents gathered near the podium and asked me to speak. I didn't prepare anything. I just stepped up, looked out at all the faces, some familiar, some new, and told them what I believe. I didn't move out here to fight. I moved out here to protect something worth protecting. These animals didn't ask to be here. They were rescued. They're here because humans failed them somewhere else. Just like we sometimes have to protect ourselves from people who forget what community means. You've reminded me of it, so thank you for standing up, for speaking out, for choosing respect over control. That's how real neighborhoods thrive. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. Diesel let out a snort right on cue, and the kids laughed. It was the best kind of punctuation to what had once been a chaotic mess of legal threats and emotional warfare. Now it was just peace, hard-earned peace. As for Karen, she disappeared from the neighborhood shortly after the ruling. Her house went up for sale within a month, and last we heard, she'd relocated to a different HOA downstate. One neighbor joked that we should send them a warning letter, but I figured they'd find out soon enough. People like Karen don't just change, they relocate their chaos until someone else stops them. But wherever she went, she left behind a legacy. She never intended a neighborhood that found its voice, a board that found its spine, and a wildlife preserve that stood taller than ever. The buffalo never noticed the drama. They still roam the pasture, munching grass and keeping to themselves. Diesel remains the quiet king of the field. A reminder that strength doesn't always have to charge. It can stand, and it can endure, much like the land they now call home. And every time I walk past that gate, the new one, with the camera-reinforced chain and a sign that reads "Protected by Nature and Neighbors," I smile, because in the end, Karen opened that gate, thinking she was walking into power, but all she did was let the truth run wild, and nothing, not lawsuits, not lies, not HOA theatrics, could put it back in the cage.